everyone. Hope everyone's doing happy. Hope you all are doing blessed, doing safe, and doing well. This here's my movie review for the A24 Pictures movie Civil War. Now, this came out on Amazon Prime a few weeks ago, and I bought it a couple days ago. And let me say, I did thoroughly enjoy this film, okay? It was kind of really along the lines of movies like Red Dawn and Tomorrow When the War Began, those type of films, okay? But it was definitely filmed and told from a different perspective than those films were. Where those films had like action in it all the time, where it was almost pure action. This one was definitely interspaced with character moments as well as action, okay? But when the action did come, it was intense action. It was not, for the faint of heart. If you do not like intense action scenes, you will not like this movie, okay? But the action was very much intense. But it's not John Wick style action, okay? This is more act of valor type of action, okay? So let's take a look at the A24 Pictures Civil War. I'll tell you some of my thoughts and opinions on it, and at the end I'll give you a score whether or not you should pass this up or actually go out and buy it. But this here is my review for the A24 Pictures Civil War. So now let's talk about the basics of the movie. So first off, the name of the movie is Civil War. It comes in the formats of digital, DVD, and Blu-ray. It is 1 hour, 48 minutes, and 31 seconds. That's including the credits. The genre is action, adventure, and thriller. The production company is A24 Pictures. Continuing on, the director is known as Alex Garland. And besides Civil War, he is known for Ex Machina, Men, and Annihilation. Now, besides Alex Garland directing it, we have Kristen Dunst starring in it as Lee, Wagner Moura as Joel, Kaylee Spinani as Jesse, Nick Offerman as the President, Jefferson White as Dave, Nelson Lee as Tony, Ivan Lai as Bohai, and Stephen McKinley Henderson as Sammy. These are the main actors who will be playing in the movie Civil War. So my first point I want to make about this movie is it's not told in the traditional sense of these movies. Civil War kind of falls into that realm of Invasion USA, Red Dawn, Tomorrow When the War Began, those type of movies, okay? And normally those movies are told from the perspective of someone fighting in the war, someone engaged in combat, okay? Not this time. This time, this movie is told from the perspective of someone on the outside, where this whole focus of this movie is not about the war itself. Okay, the war is just a big backdrop to these reporters and photographers who are trying to tell the story of the war. Okay, and I think that by giving an outside perspective, by not having it take place from one side or the other, you really are keeping the movie non-political, okay? Now, politics does rear its ugly head every now and then. I, for one, will accept that and understand that. Anytime you're dealing with a movie titled Civil War or about a modern-day Civil War, politics are going to rear its ugly head, okay? But to be honest with you, the fact that they kept this outside of a combatant, that they made the focus to be the photographers and the reporters and all that, really does keep this movie as non-political as possible. Okay? And that was one of my big concerns going into this movie, that they were going to try to demonize one side or the other. And in that case, they didn't. Okay? And by keeping it on the outside, by being an outsider's perspective looking in, okay, they really did keep this as non-political as possible. And I really did enjoy that. And it really did allow me to, really like the movie a lot more than what it could have been. They could have chosen a side, okay? And they could have told this from one perspective or another, from one side or another. And I think that if they'd done that, they would have alienated a lot of viewers of this movie, okay? One way or the other. But by choosing not to tell the story from one side or the other by choosing to tell it from the point of view of the press. Okay, they really did try to keep this as non-political as possible, and they made it a lot easier to enjoy, no matter what your political affinity will be. Okay, I really did like that about this movie, and it allowed me to enjoy it a lot more than, say, if they had told it from one side or the other. So, before I keep going forward, I do have to put a spoiler warning on here, okay? Because I really don't want you spoiled for this movie, alright? But in order to really do this review, I have to talk about story details. And I know the movie's been out for about a month as of the recording of this video and all that. But still, I don't want you spoiled, okay? So please, know, from this moment forward, there will be spoilers past this point. When you no longer see this image, that means there will not be spoilers. So, continuing on, the whole entire movie is centered around these photographers. Alright, and the Civil War is coming to an end, okay? And so what's happened is that Texas and California have launched a civil war against the United States government. And you basically have three sides. You have the Western forces, which are made up of Texas and California. You have the Florida Alliance, which is made up of a loose coalition of states around Florida. And then you have the American government, what's left of it, okay? And as the movie starts, okay, the Western forces are basically parked outside of the Capitol, waiting to take Washington, D.C., okay? That they're basically parked out there, and you can tell that there's rumors floating around about why they are just sitting there and all this other stuff. Well, the whole point of this movie is for these photographers and reporters to try to get from New York City to Washington, D.C. to interview the president. But there's a few problems along the way. First off, most of the infrastructure has been destroyed by the Civil War. Secondly, you can't go into Washington, D.C. and be a reporter because you'll be shot on sight. They consider reporters to be the enemy in Washington, D.C. Now, this really does paint the government as I guess you could say, a certain type of government that is evil. Okay? But that's basically the story of Civil War, is that these reporters are trying to get from New York to Washington, D.C. to interview the president before he's basically killed. Because we later learn in the movie that there is not a capture order for the president. It's a kill order. Okay? That the president is to be removed, eliminated. Okay? In this movie. Alright, that's how the movie it plays out. Is that these reporters are trying to get from New York to Washington, D.C. But they can't do a straight shot. They have to go like a roundabout way. And as they do, they encounter all these different facets of how the Civil War has affected the United States. So, by now, you know that Kirsten Dunst plays a photographer in this movie. She plays a war photographer named Lee, and she's trying to get to Washington, D.C. before the war ends and the city falls to rebel forces, okay? She's one of the photographers trying to get there, okay? Along the way, she meets Jesse, who is kind of a naive, photographer. And the movie is cut in such a way that it's interspaced between photos taken by Lee and Jesse, as well as, actual footage. Okay, so throughout the movie, there are different times where there will be an action scene, and then a photo will be taken, and you'll see what the photo came out to look like. Okay, I think that's really interesting, and I really like how they did that, because it really does reinforce the perspective that this is not of one side or the other, that this is from a war photographer's point of view, of someone who's trying to tell the story of the Civil War from their point of view, from what they're seeing. So early on in the movie, it's revealed that journalists are shot on sight in D.C. So this first off indicates to me that either martial law has been declared in the city, or that somehow, some way, the Bill of Rights have been rescinded in the city of D.C. Okay? Later on in the movie, we learn that the FBI has been disbanded, and that it's obvious as you go throughout the movie that the economy has collapsed. Because there's a scene in particular where they're trying to buy gas, and then the people at the gas station will not take American money. They'll only take Canadian. Okay? So that tells us right there that three things have happened. One, that rights have been rescinded either through martial law or through some type of act of Congress where the rights have been taken away. 2, that the FBI has been disbanded. And 3, that the economy is in complete and utter shambles. Okay? These 3 things have happened by the point of the movie. So, one of the things that happens as they leave New York City to try to get to Washington, D.C., is you see that the United States infrastructure has been decimated outside of the big cities. Okay? Inside the big cities, when the movie starts, they got power, they got internet. The power may go down every now and then, but it's basically off and on internet, off and on power. No, it's basically as if it was a bad storm, okay? But as soon as you get away from the major cities, you see scenes right out of The Walking Dead. I mean, highways full of abandoned cars and burnt out cars. You see helicopters in mall parking lots. You see scenes of barbarism that you would see overseas in like a newsreel, but they're shown in such a way that it's like they're happening here in the States. You see what I'm saying? There's one scene in particular where Jessie is kind of freaking out a little bit, so Lee shows her a helicopter. And behind this burnt out helicopter they're looking at, there's a JCPenney's. And this looks like exactly like a mall that I used to go to as a kid. Exactly like the mall that I used to go to as a kid. JCPenney sign and all, okay? And it was a creepy feeling. A good creepy feeling, but a feeling that made you think and said, this could have happened in my neighborhood. This movie could have taken place in my neighborhood. And that feeling stays with you, you know? And I have honestly not had that feeling since a TV show called Jericho. Okay? I had that same feeling with Jericho, and I'm having it again with this movie. It's not a bad feeling, it's just a creepy feeling that makes you think that this could really happen. That this very well could happen in the United States. That this could be what happens in the United States. And at times it gives it more of a documentary feel than a fiction feel. So as the movie progresses, we really understand that Lee is the seasoned photographer. That she's been in war zone after war zone, and she's become kind of jaded to it all. Whereas Jessie is still the young photographer, full of spirit, and Lee is trying to teach Jessie how to survive in this world. Because Lee knows that there have been many war photographers who have died, and she doesn't want to see the same thing happen to Jessie. Now, this does not start out like that in the movie. At the movie, Lee really is angry that Jessie is kind of tagging along in this. But as the movie progresses, they get to be a friendship and a mentorship of Lee teaching Jessie how to survive in this world. Okay? So that way she don't make the same mistakes that maybe Lee did. So this is not a non-stop action movie. Okay? Alright? But when the action does happen, it is intense, brutal, and realistic, okay? This is not going to be John Wick stuff. This is going to be Act of Valor stuff, okay? And it's shot in such a way that you really don't know who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, okay? And I think that's another way for them to keep it non-political, alright? Now, let me say this. There are scenes where it's obvious that the government is the bad guy, okay? They do some horrible things. But there's also scenes where it's kind of wondering, are the Western forces any better? Okay, the action is brutal, it's realistic, and when it does happen, it is very realistic. And it is not like John Wick stuff, okay? This is Act of Valor. You see guys acting tactically. You see guys, healing their friends, putting bandages on them and stuff. But you also see scenes of brutality. Okay, they do not hold back the brutalities of war. Okay, and I think I really like that about this movie. Okay, that this is not John Wick. This is more Act of Valor in terms of the action. So I know everyone's wanting me to talk about the scene with the guy with the red glasses. This is probably one of the more popular scenes in the trailer. All right. Let me say that is probably the most political scene you will see throughout this entire movie. And the longest one. Because in that scene, he kind of breaks down a mentality of there's us Americans and them Americans, okay? Whereas if you're from Florida or if you're from California, you're them Americans. But if you're from the federal government, you're us Americans. And you really don't know what side he's on, okay? Because he was wearing no patches. He's not showing allegiance to any side. So I think he's really just what I call a chaos merchant. He's just there feeding off the chaos. This scene is incredibly brutal, especially for Jesse. And especially for the story in general because of what happens. And the results of these photographers meeting this guy are incredibly brutal. And it does kind of hit things home about what these war photographers go through. So we finally get to the final battle scene. Alright, the one that was shown in the trailers, you know. Let me say that the final battle is intense. That it doesn't hold back from the brutality of what's going on. Okay, but because of a story idea earlier in the movie, it did feel hollow, okay? And what I'm talking about is, as they're at this base of Western forces that are getting ready to attack the capital, they find out that the military has basically surrendered, that the Joint Chiefs have surrendered, that the only people holding the city are a group of diehards and the Secret Service. And I felt that this was kind of a cop-out, okay? That this was kind of a cop-out in terms of story, alright? And it did make the final battle feel kind of hollow, you know? Now, that does not take away from the intensity of it, you know, and all that. But in terms of story, it made it feel kind of hollow. But another thing about the final battle is that it is very reminiscent of scenes from World War II. Of scenes from the storming of Berlin. You know, those type of scenes. This literally, if you put this in a black and white, this would literally look so similar to those scenes, it would be unreal. Okay? The only thing that would be different would be the weapons and maybe the soldiers fighting. Okay? I mean, it's very, very reminiscent of those scenes where you see soldiers running towards, you know, blown out streets, where you see soldiers firing on landmarks and all that. So these scenes at the end of the movie, when they finally do get to Washington, D.C., and the Western forces storm the Capitol, are very, very reminiscent of World War II scenes of the storming of Berlin and other places. So towards the end of the movie, as they finally get into the White House, Lee is shot. And the way it's shot in the movie is very cool, and it feels almost like Lee is handing the baton to Jesse. Because the way that her death is shot through Jesse's point of view. It's shot through a series of snapshots from Jesse's camera. Okay? Just like a war photographer would be taking the shot of someone being killed. This here is the shot of Lee dying in front of her. Okay? And I really did feel like, you know, this was the handing of the baton to a new generation of photographers. That Lee was saying, now it's your job to tell these stories. You know, to tell the people about war. To warn them about this sort of thing. Okay? And that as Lee fell and Jesse took these shots, it really felt like Lee was handing the baton to her, to Jesse, to continue doing this story and continue doing what she does, which is to tell the story of war. To tell and warn people why this should not happen. So one final note I want to make, and it's about the ending of the movie. So first off, there is no end credit scene, okay? The only thing I would consider an end credit scene was, as the credits start to roll, a photo Jesse took of the scene of what happened in the Oval Office slowly develops, okay? And that's basically all there is, and that's just it. The credits start to roll. The other thing is that the movie is left very open-ended. I mean, you see the end of the Civil War, but what happens next, you know? And I think that was on purpose, so that way you can place your own stories into what happened next after the Civil War. I mean, it could be like the Florida Alliance try to take over, you know, the Texas, or that California and Texas started fighting it out, or whatnot, okay? Like, it really leaves it open to interpretation to the viewer of what happens next. And I really did like that. So now let me tell you what I liked about this movie. So first off, I liked the fact that it was very non-political. When I first heard they were making a movie like this, I was very worried that they were going to make it very political. That one side or the other would be seen as the bad guy and they would alienate people. Okay? Me included. Okay? But the way they shot the film, the way they did things, made it very non-political in my view. The most political moment of the movie comes with the dude with the red glasses. Okay? That is the most political moment in the movie. Okay? And so I really enjoyed that fact that they kept it very non-political. Okay? Because that was one of my worries, was that they were going to go into this rabbit hole of politics and right-wingism and all this other nonsense. And I didn't want that. Okay? I wanted a good movie where I didn't have to worry about which side was which, what political side the directors and the actors were on, or anything like that. That this was just a good movie that I could lose myself in for a couple of hours. And it was. Okay? And I'm really glad they kept politics out of it as much as they could. Now, I wasn't expecting them to keep it out completely, because there ain't no way you can keep politics out of a subject like a Civil War. But the fact that they kept it at a minimum really is a bonus in my book. So another plus about this movie was the characters. You know, I really did enjoy the characters. Whether it was Kirsten Dunst's Lee, who was the rough and gruff photographer who had seen it all and done it all and become jaded. Whether it was Jessie, the naive girl who's trying to make her way through all this. Or Sammy, the photojournalist who's maybe done this a little bit too longer, but still doesn't want to quit, still doesn't want to retire, and really doesn't want to go into that good night. Or Joel, the wild card in all this, who at times is a common voice to Jessie, a knowledgeable voice to Jessie, but at other times is a calming and screaming voice throughout the movie. Okay? I really enjoyed these characters, and there's going to be a character you can connect with in some way, shape, or form in this movie. Okay? I really did enjoy these characters. Another thing I liked was the action. When the action came, it was hard-hitting, intense. This is not John Wick style action, okay? This is like true-to-life military action, okay? You're not going to see people doing the John Wick flick every 5 seconds or doing this over-sensualized action. This is more along the terms of actor valor or a war movie than it would be John Wick or something along those lines. Okay, this is real, true-to-life action, and I like that. Okay, if they had tried to make it like a John Wick, Civil War type of thing, it would have lost a lot of the realism. But the fact that they did make it so real, the fact that they did actually do like tactical things like flanking, using rockets and all that is intense in itself, okay? And then the battles when they happen, I mean, especially the end battle scene in Washington, D.C., okay? When you see what happens in Washington, D.C. in that end battle, is intense, and honestly, it's like a throwback to all the war films we saw from WW2, okay? It's literally like that. Many of these scenes, if you made them in black and white, they would look almost exactly like those scenes from WW2, okay? Not high-tech weaponry or anything like that, but just like soldiers fighting soldiers. You know what I'm saying? Not John Wick style stuff, but actually flanking, using cover, healing, trying to heal your friends with bandages and whatnot, you know? And it was truly intense action when it happened. So now let me talk about what I did not like about this movie. So the first thing I did not like about this movie was the fact that it is taking place toward the end of the Civil War. You know, you see all these incredible scenes, okay? Whether it's trees burning in Appalachia or, you know, burnt out cars on the highway. And you just want to know what happened there? You know, what's the story there? What's the story with the helicopter in the JCPenney parking lot? You know, and I would have liked to at least gotten some type of foundation. Okay, this happened, and this happened, and this happened. Okay, I'm not asking for exact details, but give us some foundation about how things got from point A to point B. Okay, you know, why they did what they did. Okay, who left first? Who started attacking who first? Now, I would have liked that foundation in this movie. Now, I think that this was a knowledgeable choice by the people behind the movie. And I think it was so to keep things as non-political as possible. But I really wish they would have added that foundation into the movie. The only other thing I did not like about this movie was the final battle in Washington, D.C. Now, the action was intense in that battle, okay? I absolutely loved that battle scene, that whole sequence that happened. But I felt that a story decision that happened a few scenes before that was kind of a cop-out, okay? I really felt that they should have had a no-holds-barred fight in Washington, D.C. Instead, it felt hollow, you know, up until they finally get the guy, okay? It felt very hollow, you know, like, okay, these are just a bunch of diehards and crazies who want to go down with the ship, okay? When it could have been so much more, okay? And it just felt really hollow. And I felt it was a cop-out, okay? I'm not going to lie. Now, the battle scene itself was intense, action-packed, all that, okay? Realistic, the whole 9 yards. But it felt hollow in the fact that, you know, what happened beforehand, before the battle happened, really kind of took the power out of what was going on. Kind of really took the oomph out of everything. So I really would have liked if the battle scene had not felt so hollow. Okay? If it had a little bit more oomph to it in terms of story instead of in terms of action. So what score do I give Civil War? I give it an 8 out of 10 stars. I think if it wasn't for the fact that it's taking place towards the end of the Civil War and we really don't know what started it to begin with, and also the fact that because of a story choice they made earlier, that the final battle felt kind of hollow in terms of story, I think that it would have been a 10 out of 10 stars. I really did enjoy this movie. And the fact that they kept it as non-political as they did is in on itself a success. Because that was one of my main worries about this movie, was that it was going to get too political. And it didn't. Okay? Yeah, politics did rear its head every now and then, but they were few and far between. Okay? So yeah, 8 out of 10 stars. Check this movie out. It's Alex Garland's Civil War from A24 Pictures. I really did enjoy it. So look, that is my review for the movie Civil War. Check out some of my other book reviews as well as other stuff I'm putting up on YouTube and Odyssey later on. I will see y'all in the next video and in the next stream. Laters.
And the grey hollow